It ain't complicated, you know, man. Like a damn Rubik's Cube, man. You like talking about that blue, red, man, then you get to one side and like,
All right, the Politicrat. Welcome to the Jay Burden Show. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. So again, much like my last show, not to pull the curtain back, but this is another kind of impromptu stream, right? I had some guests cancel, and thankfully you stepped in to pick up the slack. And I will say, I was not aware of your content before today, but you as both your video essays and your other work is just 10 out of 10. Really, like there's a lot of good stuff there. So before we get into your work explicitly, can you kind of describe to the people at home who you are and what you do?
Well, I am, of course, the Politicrat. I am a content creator on YouTube. I am a writer. I'm a historian. I guess, I mean, my background school-wise is economics, English, and political science, but I wouldn't necessarily call myself an economist, but that definitely is an area of expertise that I'm in. Let's see, my only two claims to fame, I would say, are repopularizing the works of Oswald Spengler, particularly due to my line of work, or my previous line of work, as well as coining the term boomercon. So back in 2018, back in a previous Politicrat era, because there were two eras, major eras of the Politicrat. The first one was my hardcore libertarian era, which survived was like about 2 Twitter accounts long. The first time I got banned after I called Charlie Kirk, who's a complete chuckle fuck, but I called him a retard after he said that Donald Trump is the reason why we are no longer like enemies with North Korea. And I'm just like, dude, like you're a retard, dude. Like that again, that's a mean word. But still, it accurately describes him. And then the second time, I built a pretty large following, like a 2K subscribers about. Was again big into the libertarianism thing by the end of like 2019, but like right before the pandemic, and this is the funny part, I was banned after I excuse me, I was banned after I was engaging with the Chinese foreign minister on Twitter, and he was concerned trolling about American racism, which is hilarious because China is like far more racist than the United States. And so I was calling out the genocide in the Xinjiang, Qing, whatever region, or I don't know what it's called, but the Uyghurs.
I think it's called the Bing Chilling region, I believe is the technical term.
I don't know. I don't speak Chinese, but but either way, it was I called that out, and I called him Mushu because he looked like Mushu from Mulan, and I said, I hope your entire regime dies a slow, painful death. Twitter took that as a death threat. And so I got banned for insulting the Chinese foreign minister. Then I took a break for a while. I went to go touch grass for a few months. Pandemic happened. What's funny is 3 weeks after I cursed the Chinese regime, the first reports of out of Wuhan about the coronavirus came out. So I like to think I accidentally.
There's a non-zero chance that the Chinese released the COOF specifically because they were mad at you for dunking on them on Twitter, is what you're saying.
Yeah, no. Yeah, absolutely. But I was saying from the beginning, it was created in a lab. Nobody was calling me a conspiracy theorist. And then the moment that Josh Hawley said it, people were calling me a conspiracy theorist. Of course, because a Republican started saying it. It was super inconvenient for me too, because I hate the boomercons. But either way, in terms of the second Politicrat era, that was when I started my YouTube channel up in August. I think I took a break from Twitter for a while to work on my history book, which I haven't touched in a while, but over COVID. And then I started my YouTube channel, started doing a live stream series, which to a lesser extent still goes on today because I just don't have as much time these days. But the Political Pigpen, which is currently in season 2, panel-based live stream. I bring in content creators and non-content creators to discuss different topics. Alkazai, who's a unironic neoliberal, used to be my co-host, but he got busy. So Darth Kilhoun, who is a reactionary Catholic, YouTuber. I definitely recommend that you go check him out. Became my co-host. And we'll have people on like Yiz the Eunuch, Paul Fahrenheit when he has time, Kringvolker, as I call him, Cringe Walker, in case you guys are aware of him. And of course, for the entertainment, Ray Murasami. I don't know if you're aware of her, but
Yeah, it's odd. I don't know how I had never encountered you before, because all of our friends are the same people, right? Like I know,
I know,
actually don't know
it's
Ray, but
hilarious.
everyone other than that, I know pretty well.
Yeah. But other than live streams, yeah, I do interviews, like actually. So I'll do like live streams with like individual people sometimes, more like off the cuff things. So like I'm close friends with John David Ebert, who is basically a rogue intellectual academic who has a YouTube channel. Brilliant guy. Definitely go check him out. He's the only one in the United States who knows more about Oswald Spengler than I do. And it's not even a competition either. Like he knows 10 times more about Spengler than I do. But other than that, yeah. So I've had him on. I recently had alias Gregory Hood, but Kevin Deanna from VDare. I had him on the other day. We were chatting about like Evola and not Yaki, Burnham, James Burnham, another big influence of mine. Not Deanna, but Burnham. And then I've also had long form interviews before. I've interviewed Walter Block, David Friedman. Let's see. Yeah, John David Ebert, of course. I'm interviewing Walter Block again. Twice I've interviewed gubernatorial candidate Larry Sharp from New York. So I do long form interviews, and I don't know. And I make video essays too. I'd like to make more, but again, I just don't have that much time. But yeah, I'm a pretty small content creator. Hoping to potentially speak at the Skillings America event in June, but that remains to be seen for several different reasons. But yeah, I mean that's pretty much what I'm about. Historian, I guess, lay theologian, economist, quote unquote. I'm probably a shitty economist, but an economist nonetheless. So yeah, that's what I'm about.
Well, fair enough. That's a pretty comprehensive answer. So I when it came to reviewing your work, I went back over a video that you did on a man named wow, this is incredibly professional. I had it pulled up, and a man named John Glubb. And
Sir
John Glubb
actually.
All right, fair enough. Sir John Glubb, who is someone I was by no means familiar with, and I'm familiar broadly speaking in kind of broad strokes with Spengler. But if you could you kind of describe who Glubb was and how he kind of plays into the the broader field of cyclical history?
Absolutely. So Glubb was a British general back during World War II. Of course, he served in the Great War as well. But he was very specifically known. Well, of course, he had a number of honors in both wars, but his main claim to fame was for his service in Palestine or the Levant, just in general. Pick your term, whatever, it doesn't matter. But so he's basically the unsung successor to T.E. Lawrence in a number of ways. I'd say he even managed to surpass him, but there was no comprehensive biography on him that allowed for his exploits to really be publicized as much as T.E. Lawrence, who was one of the most, I guess, the first major figure to be biographatized. I don't know the best word to use, but like in person through interviews in the 20th century with the advent of contemporary journalism. But Glubb, unfortunately, never had that. But Glubb himself, during his time, he forged a very close relationship with the Arab people, learned a lot about Islam. I'm actually kind of half surprised he never converted to Islam himself, but knew quite a bit about Islamic culture, Arabic empires. And so when he was studying the rise and fall of these various Arabic empires, which were his prime interest in history, or just in terms of his historical studies, he noticed an interesting similarity between all of these empires that he studied. And it was that they have a common lifespan on average of about 250 years. So that's 10 generations. And so from their rise to their collapse. So he divided it into 5 different ages over the course of this 250-year period: the age of pioneers, the age of conquests, the age of commerce, the age of intellect, and the age of decadence. And then following the age of decadence, then that's when the empire starts to collapse. And it's usually an empire's hubris that results in its ultimate collapse. And you see this with all empires in general. And so you see this, it's very similar to people like Arnold Toynbee, Oswald Spengler, of course. The only difference is, instead of analyzing civilizations, he analyzes empires within these civilizations. So he focuses on this more specific topic. But again, it is all organic, it's cyclical. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much him in a nutshell. But very interesting figure. He published his theory in an essay that I would recommend everybody here read. Maybe you could link it in the show notes below, because there is a free PDF online. But The Fate of Empires and Search for Survival. Again, that sort of was my, I was telling you before the stream, I wouldn't consider it necessarily a full black pill or anything, but it definitely was what red pilled me sort of into that Spenglerian direction, because I was really obsessed with Glubb maybe like late 2017 and 2018. And then in early 2019, I discovered Spengler, especially because my profession at the time was I was working with books, with and around books. And so that also was what I guess gave me the agency to be able to popularize people like Spengler and Glubb, both through social media and through clients that I had. And Paul Fahrenheit was actually a client of mine in my previous job. So that's how we met. However, we weren't aware of who the other was at the time. But then we realized, oh wait, you're Paul Fahrenheit. Oh wait, I'm the Politicrat. And we also met through John David Ebert, who is a friend of both of us as well. So it's just funny. I mean, I know we were talking about this a little bit before the stream, but it's kind of funny, like how we all kind of intersect, like all these different circles in the quote unquote, again, I hate the term dissident right, but it does all intersect, and we kind of do all know each other in some sort of way, or are connected. So
Yeah, it's interesting to me because I by no means consider myself a historian. My historical knowledge, I think, is serviceable at best. But I do remember in school, because I got my associate's degree at liberal arts, and then later my 4-year degree in finance. And one of the things that was odd to me is there are kind of 2 theories of the world, which have names but are never really addressed by name, that every single humanities professor I ever had was fully and firmly against. And one of them, which is a separate conversation we can address later if you want, is the great man theory, right? Like, it's all trends and forces. It's all downstream of Marx, which fair enough, there's a discussion to be had there. But the other one is the idea of cyclical history, right? All of them were totally and firmly convinced of what Moldbug described as Whig history. Right, the idea that essentially progress is a linear graph. And so I wonder, do you think that there's a reason for kind of the regime, the court historians' hatred for cyclical history? Do you think there's some kind of like motivating factor to that?
I think it's just the zeitgeist that we are in. And you see, it's very similar, because the Whig theory of history, of course, you'll see these modern historians will say, oh no, we don't believe in a Whiggish view anymore. That's stupid. We just believe it's all just cause and effect. But in reality, they actually do subscribe to a Whiggish view of history. They just like to, even if they don't realize it, their view is still fundamentally Whiggish, but it's definitely has more of an empirical basis, but it's still Whiggish nonetheless. But it's actually very similar to today how it was following the Napoleonic Wars. After the Napoleonic Wars, you saw this great period of like peace and stability throughout all the entire Western world. The idea that everything would keep getting better and better and better. You see this in people like, especially people like John Stuart Mill, of whom I am a very big fan. He's sort of, the writings of Mill are what got me into politics or political theory to begin with. So I have absolutely no hatred for the man. But a lot of people of his ilk also had this very progressive, Darwinistic, again, Whiggish view of history. And when I say Darwinistic, I don't mean like social Darwinism, survival of the fittest. I mean like literally in terms of like evolutionary, everything's moving in a specific evolutionary direction. And then just the idea that the world was getting better and better. But then there was one event that ultimately ended up sort of shattering that worldview, and that was World War I, and as well as the Russian Revolution. So you had historians who started reassessing their view of history after that, and they realized, okay, maybe things aren't getting better and better and better, and you started seeing this sort of pessimism in a sense. I mean, I wouldn't say it was all necessarily pessimistic, but just this sort of but it was definitely pessimism might be a good way of saying it. And then also cyclical, the idea of rises and falls. Different historians and academics and philosophers, of course, traced these rises and falls in just in different ways. They had their own metrics of doing it, but overwhelmingly it was still based out of that same mindset. Even though the theories, some of them contradicted, some of them were conflicting. That's besides the point. They were all expressions of the same zeitgeist. In a larger, like, literary and philosophical sense, there is a reason why The Great Gatsby, The Decline of the West, T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, and James Joyce's Ulysses all came out the same year. They are all fundamentally expressions of that same post-war declinist zeitgeist. And then you had World War II that happened. But very similar to after the Napoleonic Wars, when that sort of Whiggish view really started taking off, that post-Enlightenment view of history, the same thing sort of started shrouding our view of history as well in the post-war era. The idea that things are getting better and better and better as the world materially progresses, we're also progressing in like every single way. And that is sort of the, I guess, the sort of the consensus that we currently reside in. It's part of the, as Mr. Academic Agent would say, the boomer truth regime. That is the historical consensus of the boomer truth regime. And you had people who challenged this, including establishment figures such as Samuel Huntington, who wrote The Clash of Civilizations, which was essentially a neo-Spenglerian work of foreign policy. It basically took neo-Spenglerian philosophy and then applied it to foreign policy. And then also people like Henry Kissinger, who actually wrote his undergrad thesis at Harvard, 400 pages long, on Oswald Spengler. And he is the most notable neo-Spenglerian today. So two very hyper-establishment figures. Of course, Huntington's dead now, but who apply this sort of neo-Spenglerian view of history. And the thing is, though, modern academics, a lot of them are aware of Oswald Spengler. They just don't talk about him. And it's not that... So they basically want to hate him, but they know that he's right. They know that he is such a good historian that he's not convenient to their narrative. Hence why he is no longer assigned in like university history classes, including someone like Arnold Toynbee, who's definitely a lot less controversial than Spengler in terms of his politics. Toynbee was, I guess, a lot closer to Huntington, an establishment figure who taught at the London School of Economics, liberal internationalist. But at the same time, in a study of history, which it was at the time of its publication considered the most comprehensive historical study written since Edward Gibbon's The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. But it fell out of favor eventually too during that post-war consensus. The idea, again, the Whiggish fear, the Whiggish view of history has returned, and that is the truth regime under which we currently live. So.
Well, there's almost a certain, perspective from which, if they admitted that, society was or was heading for a decline, they would kind of have to own the fact that they were the ones, or their progenitors were the ones who were at the helm at that time. And this weird relationship where liberals, you know what I mean? When these people simultaneously have to pretend to be continually out of power and are very clearly the ones calling the shots. You kind of don't want to be, you don't want to accept the fact that maybe you're the reason that things aren't working so well. That it does kind of reflect poorly on them if there is, a decline happening or a decline possible. Anyway, that's just kind of
I would definitely agree with that. Yeah.
So there's one other thing in this that, do you think that, I guess, kind of the motivation behind this cycle, like, do you think that it is just kind of like an inherent part of human nature, or like what else do you think causes this kind of like relatively, at least in the Western context, repetitive, 10 generational cycle that this author described?
Are we referring back to Glubb again? We're referring to empire.
Referring back to Glubb, of course.
Okay, so more or less, and so this is where I've added on to Glubb, since Glubb, I feel like, and I said this in my video essay, which I definitely recommend everybody check out, but he didn't necessarily. So Glubb defined empire as just as a great state that manages to exert force over other countries in general. So it doesn't have to have an empire in order to be or it doesn't have to have an emperor in order to be an empire. So by all intents and purposes, the Roman Republic was still very much an empire. In fact, it was far more militaristic than the Roman Republic. The United States is very much an empire, or rather America in general. The United States is just the imperial core of that wider global empire, or I know, as tongue-in-cheek in our circles, we call it the gay global American empire. But either way, so yeah, the 10 generational cycle very much does exist for most empires. But the one thing that Glubb did not do, he did not apply it into a Spenglerian sense of civilization. Because when you take a look at civilization as a wider whole, empires do not exist until about halfway through the civilization's life, or maybe about like a third of the way. So for instance, you can't consider, if we were to mark the beginning of the modern West, or the Christian/modern West, as being around the time of the Battle of Tours, which I would say the defeat of the Saracens at Tours by Charles Martel, I'd say that is like the symbolic beginning of Western civilization. Because in order for a civilization to start, there has to be some sort of conflict that requires it, like a people or a society, to react to in order to prompt the construction of a civilization. So, for instance, by that metric, the Holy Roman Empire, and I know, of course, you have the Voltaire quote. He famously said, "The Holy Roman Empire was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire." But I think that is even more true, because it would not fit Glubb's definition of an empire, because they called it an empire, but it was really more of a large dynastic state. It wasn't an empire in the same sort of morphological, biological sense as something like the Portuguese Empire or the British Empire or something like that, which were coherent systems, central systems that developed as these certain societal, economic, military I guess systems were developed, or that developed over the course of the Middle Ages, which culminated in the rise of these empires. So you can't really call like early empires in a civilization, or states that call themselves empires, as being empires in this Glubbian or Glubbite, whatever adjective you want to use, sense. So, and then also you need to differentiate between a state and an empire in general, because a state can exist after an empire has already collapsed, and it still very may well call itself an empire, or consider itself an empire. So the United States of America, of course, was founded in 1776, but the American Empire did not begin until 1803. And again, this is by my own personal metric. Glubb never specified anything having to do with the United States, but it began with the Louisiana Purchase. And that was pretty much our age of pioneers: the Lewis and Clark expeditions, the Barbary Wars, all the way, I'd say, up until about the time of Andrew Jackson or Polk, maybe. But then that's when the Age of Conquest began in the United States. In the Age of Conquest, when we hear about Manifest Destiny and the pioneers and all that stuff, that was not the Age of Pioneers. That was the Age of Conquest. It was just a very decentralized civilian, I guess, kind of conquest of the Americas. Of course, even though technically we legally owned all this Native American land, there was still a heavy resistance. We still effectively conquered the land from the indigenous peoples that lived there. And that really was our age of conquest. And then that sort of culminated with the presidency of Ulysses S. Grant. Then we moved into the age of commerce during the quote unquote Gilded Age with the rise of the tycoons and the robber barons. And then the age of commerce turned into the age of affluence, which comes before the age of intellect. But I think I feel like I didn't mention the age of affluence. I feel like I screwed up earlier. But the age of affluence, which is basically the age of commerce on steroids, and it's basically the excesses of that, which I would say happened from around the time of the post-war era, through the Roaring 20s, all the way up until maybe about the 1960s. But then you had the age of intellect, which began in the 1960s, when you have all these intellectuals who start hyper analyzing society, trying to deconstruct everything. You see people like, I know he wasn't American, but someone like Foucault would fit into that sort of zeitgeist as well. You'd see even like the civil rights movement was a offshoot of that. And this doesn't mean like vilifying the civil rights movement or anything. I'm just very neutral in this analysis. But definitely, you definitely see like with the rise of these intellectuals and these new ideas, and you see critical theory also emerge during this time as well. But it definitely represented sort of a deconstruction and a sort of social revolution that turns the traditional hierarchy upside down. And so that age of intellect, I would say, and the age of intellect, that's basically the high noon of the empire. That is when the empire is at its height. It's a healthy time for the empire. However, a lot of this sort of over intellectualization makes the empire almost lose faith in itself. And then that, in combination with the economic excesses of the age of affluence that carry over into the age of intellect, as well as imperial hubris, social hubris, overextension of the military, that is that all that together. So that sort of imperial consensus is the architect of the empire's own destruction. And you start to see that breakdown during the age of decadence, which is a period of moral decline, political stagnation. Just basically think of the Roman Republic in the first century, and I say that's where the United States is right now. And I'd say one of the best, because in people that emerge during this time, public figures, art, writers, all this stuff, they're all fundamentally expressions of the age into which they exist. So if you think about it, someone like Donald Trump would be the political avatar of the age of decadence, because he's just, and again, I don't know if you like Donald Trump or not. I'm saying this very neutrally, but he's very similar to someone like Commodus or Publius Pulcher or Crassus, just this very kind of cynical, degenerate con artist, who really cares more about, and Hillary Clinton would be is just as equally a good example of this as well. But somebody who tries to upend the civic unity of the nation itself, for their own gain. Again, basically, think of the age of decadence in the political sense as being the age of grifters. Another good example, and I shit on him on my YouTube channel all the time. I just like clowning on him. But I'd say the ultimate expression of political punditry in the age of decadence is somebody like Dave Rubin.
Right. Someone who, and I realize there's some irony in someone who hosts an interview show, leveling this criticism, but just someone who has almost nothing to offer on their own. It basically just exists to be kind of a blank canvas for more interesting people. And then it's just kind of a vacuum service, attached to a massive Patreon account. So there's something that I think that's interesting, is that you brought up this idea of kind of losing confidence. And to me, there are certain kind of civilizational myths, if you want to call it a civic religion, if you want to call it, kind of like the founding myths of a society that every culture has. And the problem is that I don't know if you can go back from those myths being quote unquote deconstructed, by kind of like an age of intellect. And the problem is that you kind of need to believe them to have kind of a vitalistic core to a society. And to me, it's why I'm kind of lukewarm on, the people who would call themselves kind of like postmodernist traditionalists, people who are kind of looking for a minimum viable religion, to get people back to a more kind of like healthy and sane way of organizing. Because the problem is, at least from my perspective, is that those things don't work unless you really believe them. No one's going up to the front to sign up for a myth that they know is just something that we all pretend. You actually have to think that this, kind of like deep civilizational, and the reason I'm using myth is to say something that might not be literally true, but still has truth in it.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
all right,
It's kind of like what Martin Ling said in Ancient Beliefs and Modern Superstitions. He said the purpose of myth and allegory should not be interpreted to mean the opposite of what it says, because the purpose of allegory is to convey truth, not falsehood. Otherwise, if that were not the case, there'd be absolutely no point of myth or allegory or anything at all.
Well, right, exactly, because yeah, and that's a good point that you make there. Sorry, I cut you off. You were
No. I was done. That was all I was saying. I think I was the one who interrupted you there.
Well, fair enough then, I guess. And so my point is that, to me, at least, I kind of look at this. The cycle is kind of like as entropic. You can't go
Absolutely.
back up the cycle. It's just like an element decaying. There will just be less of it after a while.
It's a human body. That's essentially what it is. Society is a body, fundamentally.
So, all right, and I guess that's a very much a point from Aristotle, right? Like in the first part of Politics, he makes a largely similar point. That essentially that society is a body made up of members, which are individual men. And so let's assume that everything you say is true. I find it rather convincing myself, but I'll be honest, I'm no great scholar. So let's assume that you're true. How is this not just pure doomer posting? It's all over. There's no hope. I mean, you can think that's true, and maybe you do, but what is the kind of, I guess, point in recognizing this?
Because it's observable.
Right. So I guess that plays back into you describing yourself as a realist. It simply is.
Yeah, no, that's the way to say it. And some people might make accusations of doomer posting or whatever. And I do admit we do live in a zeitgeist where doomsday saying is very popular. You see everyone from these from street preachers, the end is near type people, to Greta Thunberg. Even though they're talking about two completely different things, they both represent that sort of cultural zeitgeist we live in of declinism. So, and then the very same with I guess pessimistic, cyclical rise and fall, decline writers as well. Except just because it is part of the zeitgeist doesn't mean that it is not necessarily true. It might be true with some people. Like I'd say Protestant street preachers talking about the rapture, they're definitely wrong. Greta Thunberg is definitely an alarmist when it comes to climate change. However, they're still both expressions of the same phenomenon. And very similarly, so is sort of a doomer history, if I'm going to use sort of a vulgar term like that. But the only difference is there is actually truth to that specifically, at least depending upon the model that you use. I'd say somebody like Bronze Age pervert isn't necessarily correct, but somebody like Glub would be. If that might be a terrible comparison, but I think you know what I'm getting at there.
Yeah, I think I see the distinction. And there's something about, I guess, prophecies of doom that on one hand, every culture kind of has them, but I feel like in many ways, it's a proud American tradition. That it does kind of seem something that our culture in particular, and as our culture has been, largely exported to the world, these kind of, doomsday cults. And I'm a good friend of mine, Bagby, is kind of a scholar of, the first and second Great Awakenings, which were these kind of religious revival movements full of, all kinds of fun and crazy cults. It's where the Mormons came from. It's where, the Oneida group came from. All of the
I think of I don't know if you've read Blood Meridian, but I think of the opening of Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, which takes place during the Second Great Awakening, with like the big tent backwoods revival Baptists preachers and stuff like that. So,
well, right, yeah, and it is kind of a tradition in the New World, and as I see that kind of exported, with the rest of kind of American cultural influence. Like, to me, that is very much alive and well, first through kind of like the nuclear apocalypse. Yeah. Like just cultural phenomenon, the idea that the life on Earth would end. And, fair enough. Maybe it could, maybe it couldn't have, maybe it never would have happened, but it was something in like the zeitgeist again. And then again, with kind of global warming, and for YouTube, I should say, I believe all of the science, whatever it is. I'm a firm supporter of it. But nonetheless, this idea that like it's just 10 years away, it's just 15 years away, but instead
always
of
10 years away,
right? Instead of Jesus coming back on a steed to fight the Palestinians in Jerusalem or whatever, that is surely going to happen. It's the Earth itself is going to crack in half. And so I think that there is, on one hand, kind of conflicting, I guess, thoughts in my mind, which on one hand, there's the fact that like, well, things are looking a bit grim. You can name any number of problems with America, with kind of our global empire, and fair enough. But on the other hand, there's this kind of urge to assume the worst, right? That we are the last generation, that human life ends with us.
It's very arrogant too.
Yeah, it is a little arrogant.
That was actually the opening. That was the opening chapter, not the chapter. It was the overture of the history book I started writing over COVID, where I talk about like every single generation believes itself to be sort of the apotheosis of, I guess, I forget the phrase I used, but I for some reason I was about to say horticultural, but that is definitely not the term. I forget, but it's basically every generation believes itself to be the greatest. Whether that means, oh yeah, we're doomed more than any other generation, or we are smarter, or we are more morally superior. Like everybody believes that. Every single generation believes that to be the case. But that is not the truth. There is nothing special about our generation. We do have a very unique place in history, but our place is no greater than any other generation's place in history as well. We are essentially, and this is what I called the overture to my history book, prisoners to history, because we are fundamentally imprisoned in this time and place that we live, whether we like it or not.
Well, and it's so frustrating to me because I understand that playing the game of, the left is not perfectly ideologically consistent is neither particularly productive, nor I guess like a worthwhile use of your time. It'll make you go crazy very quickly.
Blood sports are pointless.
Yeah, 100%. It's part of the reason I don't do debates. I simply am correct.
Hunter Avalon are just wasting their time. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Well, they're not, because they're making lots of money.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. But like in terms of actually making any sort of intellectual contribution, they definitely are.
Oh yeah, definitely. But I've slightly lost my sentence. Oh yes, but if you notice that there's this kind of profound, historical ignorance, right? This kind of assumption that, that I live in exactly, the most correct time in human culture, the entirety of the human race. And the only reason, that my predecessors didn't think the exact same things that I do, which just happened to be the things that almost everyone else thinks. Well, it's just that my ancestors were too stupid to realize it. They're nowhere near as smart as I am. And when they thought the things that everyone in their day and age thought, well, that was just, pure stupidity. But when I do it, here and now, it's the pinnacle of reason. And I'm not to say it's confined to the left. It's just, more pronounced there, kind of due to just, basic like ideological principles.
I will say, I just want to intercede real quick and say it is not just the left. We are all, and this is what I've said, we're all progressives. We all want to see progress in our own way. We all have a vision of the future. Yeah, we may say that we want to take society back to the way it was, but in reality, our vision, even the people who say that, their visions are not actually authentic to what it was. Take a look at someone like Mussolini, Mussolini was not a reactionary. Fascism was a hyper populist, democratic even movement. There was the veneer of sort of renewal, a sort of romantic restoration of the past, but that wasn't the case, and that can never happen. And this is my problem, I guess, with a lot of reactionaries, because what reactionaries want to establish isn't actually what things were, and it is impossible to mount a revolt against the modern world in exactly to sort of restore that which once was. History is on the move forever and always. We can either die in the present, or we can prepare to face whatever comes our way. And I don't mean this in the sort of Last Jedi, forget the past, destroy it if you have to. I don't mean it in that sort of postmodern sense, but I just mean it like we can either move forward, or we can die in the present, or die in it's going to be the past at that point. It's just, or it's a reality. But we are all fundamentally progressives. We all have that. Every single Westerner has that mindset, and we cannot escape from it because it is who we are. It is in our lifeblood. And so yeah, no, it is not just confined to the left. You see plenty of right wingers. Every single right winger is the same way. So it's really, again, as and I know this plays into a very different way of looking at it, but also someone like Michael Malice is correct too when he says conservatives are just progressives driving the speed limit. So yeah, I mean, yeah.
I stand by that there are two people in the world I both could and would like to throw down the stairs. One of them is Bill Kristol, because I think it would be funny. And the other one is Michael Malice, because I don't understand how a man that little can have opinions on the internet, which is largely completely unrelated to what we're talking about. But anyway,
I know. I just will say Michael Malice, that is Michael Malice's Twitter account. That is the closest thing like we will ever get to like seeing Oscar Wilde have a Twitter account. Like, I imagine if Oscar Wilde were alive today and had a Twitter account, it would basically be Michael Malice's.
All right, fair enough. I will not ask you to elaborate on that. I think it speaks for itself.
Yeah, but the original troll.
Yeah, right. But there is something kind of to be said for the fact that, especially among conservatives, and it's why I like that, that term you came up with, BoomerCon, so much to describe, a version of quote unquote right-wing thought, who have to a certain extent kind of swallowed and imbibed the premises, the logical foundations of their enemies on such a deep fundamental level that they really can offer no meaningful resistance to them.
They don't even realize it. That's the thing.
They don't realize it. And I think that you're right in the sense that everyone, inherently kind of has this desire for progress. And really the argument is over, well, what is progress?
Yes,
and
100%.
The problem with kind of like the BoomerCon mentality is that their definition of progress is the exact same as the left's, really. Like, when you get down to it, they want kind of the exact same thing. They just want a previous version. They want the 0.8 instead of the 1.0, version of, whatever this version, like whatever progress is.
Some of them are already starting to embrace like stuff like, I won't say CRT, but sort of CRT mindset without realizing it, while at the same time going against CRT when they're using the same exact kind of argumentation, or not necessarily the same argumentation, but basically want to see the same thing.
No, definitely.
Sort of post-racial society. So yeah. Well,
and you've already seen it with kind of the dialogue around, drag shows for kids, right?
Oh God.
And this is a classic, Moldbugian point, the ratchet, Cthulhu swimming left. But by being able to set the conversation at child drag shows, the premise of drag shows at all, drag everywhere, men in dresses, has been largely accepted as, well, it's fine if they're adults. And I saw this recently with a conservative theologian, Carl Truman. He's out of Grove City, who wrote
Catholic.
No, I believe he's Anglican. But don't quote me.
Oh, well, one of my tribe. There we go.
Yes, one of your tribe. But nonetheless, he wrote a quite interesting book called The Triumph of the Modern Self, which essentially, chronicling the conception of selfhood, how people viewed themselves as individuals. And it's largely interesting. And that came out in 2019. And the start of that book features, an intro, which would not be particularly surprising for anyone kind of familiar with, more mainstream conservatives, where he essentially talks about, I wanted to write this book because I wanted to explain to someone like my dad, who fought, in World War II. I wanted to explain to someone like that how the phrase "I am a man trapped in a woman's body" was logically coherent and would make sense. How that could be something that would actually be a politically efficacious statement. So that's him in 2019. And it's largely a pretty good book. It's maybe a little bit over long, but there's something in there that's worth someone's time.
I'll have to check that out.
Oh, and Heinrich says he's a Presbyterian, so I'm incorrect on that. But he was a Protestant Christian, and
okay.
And then I hear him on a podcast in 2021, and he starts off by saying, "Well, we all know that if they're adults, there's nothing wrong with it. I don't agree with it. I don't think it's correct, but from a legal perspective, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. We should support it. It's their freedom." And you look at it and you're like, well, what the hell, man? This wasn't even 10 years. It was 2 years. I was reading your writing like not too long ago. And my point is not to skewer Truman in particular, but it was kind of a crystallized version of that for me, of essentially like by accepting, your enemy's vision of the future, you have no real defense to offer. And again, my point is not that, regime conservatives are, the puppet masters behind all of this, but they're definitely dupes. And yes,
I do think
Corbin,
another great
live.
example. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was just talking to chat. Corbin, yes, this is live.
Oh, yeah. I was saying another good example of that would be someone like David French. He's like one of the ultimate. I'd say Dennis Prager's probably the final boss of the boomer cons, but David French is definitely like up there too. If you're familiar with him.
I realize it is only January 4th, but my New Year's resolution was that I'm not allowed to talk about David French or Rod Dreher anymore, because I started talking about them too much last year, and I need some time to calm down. So yes, I am very familiar with both of those figures. Yeah, no, and it's frustrating to me, and it's kind of why I spend more time correcting and addressing "quote unquote" our people, because I find the boomer cons frustrating, and I find kind of like normal red staters frustrating, but they're my people. They're good people. And the reason I get so frustrated with them is not that there's something inherently wrong with them. It's just that they're dupes. They're marks. They're Charlie Brown, running up to the football the 10th time this week, and they're absolutely sure that this time it's going to work.
That is the perfect way to describe it.
Right.
You hit the nail on the coffin there.
And my point is not like, oh, you're stupid, you're bad, you should stop existing. My point is, wake up. Like, I am on your side. Stop acting like the greatest evil is someone, 2 clicks to the right of you. And your best friend, is the blue-haired HR lady who's being nice to you for 5 minutes so she can put a knife in your back.
Saddam Hussein's former English teacher, game theory.
Oh, that's my former English teacher.
Oh no, that's yours. Yeah, no, I was listening to that to prepare. Yeah, that's right. That was hilarious. I'm sorry. That made me laugh out loud.
It was.
I listened to that to prepare because I'd never heard your stuff before.
Oh, that was kind of
my buddies on there. So, yeah.
And I truly don't. I know Saddam is rebranded as Samuel, but I do truly love Saddam. He's a great guy, and that show is so fun because he has academic. He has access to academic papers.
Yeah.
And I knew this woman.
He gave me a Christmas gift this year, actually.
Oh, great. Well, that was nice of him. And where's my present, Saddam? But anyway.
It was a white elephant, though, so I wound up with his. So,
but nonetheless, right? And that's one of those cases where it's like, once you have the ability to actually see, what supposedly this like incredibly powerful, leftists, who really did have a lot of control over my personal life. These are not competent, scary people. Really, they're kind of flunkies. They're regime functionaries. They got there because, anyone more capable would kind of prove to be a threat. And so when I look at like, we are in a stage of decline, things are not going well on kind of a civilizational level. And so we're in a situation where it's like, we do need friends, we need people with resources. Mm-hmm. And when the people who would nominally be our friends, nominally be our patrons, supporting, young men on the right, pushing for things that, kind of like red state Americans would like and would benefit from. And they're giving their time and they're giving their money and they're giving their attention to people who hate them, And look, I'm not saying I'm some like friend of the working man. obviously I'm kind of a nerd. I like reading about politics. I like talking about books. But nonetheless, it's like, well, I don't hate these people. You know, I want them to live good lives. And to me, that seems like such a low, I guess, a low bar to clear. But so many of the quote unquote conservative elite can't even do that.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. Like I have friends. So like basically the left wing equivalent of a boomercon would be a shitlib, which is a term I think Jimmy Dore came up with it, and I think it is I prefer it to libtard. I think libtard is a fundamentally boomercon word, and it's cringe. That's why I prefer shitlib. But I mean, I know it's same on that side. Like I know some who are fundamentally great people. I have friends all over the political spectrum. I'll disagree. I have boomercon friends. I have reactionary friends. I have Marxist friends. I have ethnat friends. I have shitlib friends. I get along with all of them. But at the same time, especially referring to like the shitlib and the boomercons I know, yeah, I mean, it's they're just misguided, and they are both fundamentally under the sort of under the umbrella, or not the umbrella, but just sort of under the trance of boomer truth. And you also see it. So I'm at the point, I went through my super hardcore anti-SJW stage back 2015, 2016. First time I encountered a quote unquote SJW, a term I do not particularly care for anymore, was June 2014, when I was on this like young writers website when I was in my late teens. And I was told that like a very, very moderate, sensible thing I said is why apparently like for my saying that means I want to kill trans people. It was like something like that. That was the first time I ever encountered a quote unquote SJW.
Which
it was just really weird.
Obviously you do, but no, that was not what you were expressing.
No, but no, I mean, I'm a Christian. I don't believe in killing anybody unless they attack me. But either way, back 2015, 2016 was when I went through that really hardcore anti-SJW, anti-feminist stage, hardcore culture warrior. You saw me on college campus, like fighting the feminists, like being that kind of thing. And this was back when being an anti-SJW wasn't cringe. Like it was a natural reaction. Post Gamergate, like all that stuff. So again, like people like Sargon, and then you had people on the left like Chris Reagan, who I actually admittedly I still watch Chris Reagan. I think he's hilarious. But then we get to this point where the whole anti-SJW thing has been more or less co-opted by the boomercons. And it's just become cringe. It's become corporatized. It's become cringe. And then you see people like Dave Rubin and Michael Knowles over COVID holding CancelCon in Adam Carolla's mom's garage and stuff. And you have this like, I remember, I don't know if you remember CancelCon, but there was that really cringe social justice warriors cartoon intro. Like,
no, I don't. I thankfully never encountered that.
It's just they become parodies of themselves, and it's like at this point they're acting like the SJWs. And I'm at the point where like wokeness, it doesn't even piss me off anymore. I just think it's goofy.
Well,
like,
it's a point that I make often, that the decay has kind of affected everyone, you know. And if you even look at the left as this kind of like great antinomian evil, which I probably do, but nonetheless, you look at like, well, who was leading the left 100 years ago? You know, and you have figures like Lenin. And say what you will about Lenin. Yeah. Lenin's not embarrassing. You know, Lenin's not cringe. He's evil.
He was a badass.
He's going to kill you, but he's not embarrassing. And I look at the people who are kind of the vanguards of, you know, both the left and right, and they're inherently undignified, embarrassing human beings. You know, we've been witness to kind of this collapse of Peterson, you know, where this man can't even get through a single sentence without, you know, getting down on his knees to, you know, to pray towards Jerusalem and just instantly burst into tears. You know, and this is supposed to be kind of this like august figure, you know, teaching young men about, you know, what it is to be manly. And, same thing with people like Dennis Prager. And I read recently, I can't remember exactly what it was where he wrote it, but essentially the point was that if God exists, Holocaust deniers must go to hell. And in addition to being a largely ridiculous essay, it was written at a grade school level. Like I'm by no means a great author.
Did you see his latest one for foxnews.com, how Hanukkah created Western civilization?
No, I thought that was an edit. I didn't know that was real. I assumed that some like shitter on Telegram made that.
No, it was real.
Dear God. And so my point is, right, that the same degradation that is so easy to kind of, put your hands up in the air and say like, oh, it's all over. Like we're so decayed as a people. That's true. But the advantage is that it's affected our enemies too. That these people are the same forces that they use to kind of propel themselves to power have massively deteriorated the quality of their own operators, at least, which I guess is some kind of like silver lining to that cloud.
Yeah, no, 100%. But I know it's just like it seems like people like Dennis Prager, they're basically one trick ponies, boomercons in general. They keep saying the same thing over and over, but just in different ways. Like with Dennis Prager, it's more or less like the right is right, which is why they are called the right. So maybe we should start calling the left the wrong. This is Dennis Prager. It's just like nonsense like that. And they're not saying anything. And I think Dave Rubin is probably the worst example. I recently did a live stream with Darth Kilhoun and George, if anybody's aware of him. He's just George. He's not a content creator, but he has a big presence in our circles. Regular guest of mine, reviewing Dave Rubin's latest book, which is called Don't Burn This Country by Dave Rubin. And it's just vapid, meaningless. It's just regurgitating all of these talking points. It's even worse than Don't Burn This Book by Dave Rubin, which was his first one released back in 2020. Just drivel. Drivel. Just nonsense, repeating these same boomercon talking points. And it's like, it's not getting anything done. You're just looking for money at this point. You're just writing this it's basically conservative porn. That's basically what it is. Same with Fox News. It is right-wing, quote unquote, right-wing porn. And
it goes back to one of my kind of firmly held beliefs that the vast majority of people should have absolutely nothing to do with politics.
100%.
They're just not. And to say this, like, fair enough, maybe I'm one of those people. But I genuinely think that most people are not wired to handle those type of discussions, or to be handled, to even handle that kind of, like, I guess, like, analysis. Like, genuinely, that most people are normal and they should be allowed to be normal. And the fact that quote unquote normal people are bombarded with this kind of like fear porn on both sides, this eternal outrage machine, is genuinely something wrong with our society. Because, to be honest, for the vast majority of people, they neither have a frame to reference this against. It is just the bad thing. I dislike bad thing. And they also have nothing to do about it. They have no action to take. And so increasing their just kind of like background anxiety levels, it's really nothing more than just, a product, that they are being sold. And to me, I look at it very much like on the same level of just like scumminess is like payday loans and, in smoke shops, right? Where you're essentially kind of like preying on people's worst inclinations. Excuse me.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Or as Dave Rubin would say, I agree with that.
I'm glad to find someone else who hates Dave Rubin as much as I do. I haven't talked about it because there's almost nothing.
I hate him. He seems like a nice enough guy. Like, I'd probably
I don't know, man.
He's
got to rent a kid. I think that's weird.
He's just dumb. He's just not smart. He's just
right.
Fun.
And that's why I never talk about it. Because there's nothing to talk about.
He's fun to clown on. He's fun to clown on. He's a lol cow. That's the best way to put him. He's a lol cow.
No, that's a good way to put it, man. So anyway, we're coming up on an hour. So do you want to tell the people again where they can find you?
Yeah, sure. I'm on Twitter, the Politicrat. However, like I said, I was banned. My last account was banned, so I had to change my when I created my new one, the L in Politicrat, it's a capital I. So maybe that's how why people have a little bit more trouble finding me. Also, I am the Politicrat on YouTube. There is another person called the Politicrat on YouTube, which is like a BLM YouTuber who gets like 3 views a video, yet for some reason he always pops up in the search results before me. Same on Google, which really bothers me because I was around way before he was. Maybe the algorithm, maybe something's a little screwy's going on. Maybe the YouTube doesn't like my content. Yeah, the Politicrat on YouTube. You'll probably be able to identify which one I am. I'd really appreciate if you guys followed me on Twitter, if you guys subscribe to me on YouTube, follow my content. Again, I have a live stream series. I make video essays. I'm trying to get one out before February. But yeah, I'm trying to rebuild my following ever since that ban 3 years ago. It's really stagnated. But you don't have to subscribe to me. You don't have to follow me if you don't want. It's completely voluntary, but I'd appreciate it. But yeah,
I want to announce that I am in fact threatening my entire audience with physical force unless they do follow and subscribe to your channels, and I will enforce that. Anyway, guys, you know where to find me. Obviously, my links will be down in the description, as well as Politicrats. This show is available on YouTube and also as an audio-only show on Apple and Spotify. This has been kind of a season of change, 2023. So there will be things shifting, moving to a new schedule, same amount of content, just a little bit more regular from me. Expect a new website soon. I've been working on that today. And the monetization has also shifted. I'm no longer gating my backlog. If you want the audio only shows, they will be up. I'm kind of slowly releasing them along with my own episodes. I decided that plan wasn't really for me. I want people to be able to listen to everything I've got. Maybe we'll have some new options. I would appreciate if you support it, again, just to cover the cost of the show. And anyway, guys, we'll have some more content out. I'll have Ace from Loud Sound Epicenter back on tomorrow night, a friend of the show, to talk. And remember, guys, keep your head up. The lie can't last forever. Good night.